Hey there and welcome back to another video in the Web API series with ASP.NET Core and SecureS. So we've covered some things till now. We have configured API versioning in our Web API, and most important, we have configured Swagger in a way that it knows how to work with the versioned APIs that we have, because this comes not by default. Now, before we really go into other topics that are heavily API related, I just want to do some few other things here. And one problem that I have here is that if we look at this program.cs file, we see that we already registered a few services, and for some of the services, we even need to pass in some configuration options. And right now we have actually done only two things in our API. We have configured API versioning and we have configured Swagger to work with API versioning, and still we already have a lot of code here, so our file gets bloated. And this is one of the major problems that I see on really a lot ASP.NET Core projects, where the startup.cs file, or as we are in .NET 6, this program.cs file, gets really crowded and bloated with a lot of service registrations, configurations, and middleware registrations. So what I like to do right when I set up an API is make sure that this will never happen in that current API. So I'm setting up the basic infrastructure that we would need in order to accomplish a very smooth and clean registration of services. Now, how can we do that? Well, it's actually very easy, as one core concept is that what I would like to achieve is have a way, for instance, that when the application starts up, we should look up what services we actually want to register, and those services should be registered. And if we can split this into separate files somehow, then that would be great. And that's actually possible, and it's really not too complicated. It's actually one new concept that I would like to introduce you here, and this is registrars. So we will have like service registers for different parts of our application. Now, when I look here into what we have here on this service collection, we have things that are, from my point of view, related to the MVC configuration, like for instance the add controllers or add the API Explorer, or even add API versioning and add API versioned Explorer. These are all things that are kind of like related to the MVC stuff. So I would create and probably a register for the MVC stuff. And then the second thing that we would have here is we have things that we have added for Swagger, which are these two. So we will extract all the services for Swagger into a separate register file for Swagger. And in this case, you can then, when you want to add new services to your application, you either add them to an existing register, and those will be registered automatically, and we'll see exactly how we can achieve this. But if not, you can even create a new register. For instance, when we will add the database to our API, we'll create a new register for the database services, and so on and so forth. So let's get started with that. So let's create, first of all, a new folder here in our API project, and let's call this registers. Now, this concept of registers is not really something that it's, I would say, ASP.NET Core related, so it's not enforced by ASP.NET Core. So you might, if you think of better naming on conceptual definitions of what you actually want to achieve, then you can totally do that. It's important the way that we actually want to set up this, but then the namings that you might use could be different, so there's no problem with that. So I really like to call them registers, because like for instance, when you want to buy and then register a domain, you would do this through a domain registrar. And in this case, well, we are not doing things with domains, but we try to kind of like register services. So I see this as being a very similar concept to that. So that's why I prefer, or I tend to use this concept or definition of a registrar for the things that I want to achieve here. And what I'll need here is, first of all, a very simple interface. So let's add a new class. Let's have it called interface, and this interface would be called iRegistrar. Okay, and this interface will actually be very simple, so not complicated at all. What it will contain is actually only one single method that will return void, so we don't return anything. We call this register services. Now the important thing here is that what I would pass in here is the web application builder object, and let's call this builder. And why I would like to do this, because when we register services, we might even want or need to actually access the configuration or different configurations that are read by ASP.NET Core from different sources, or maybe we want to do something with the logging part, and those are not part of the iService collection, but they are part of the builder. So that's why I would like to have this on the builder, so when I want to register a service, if I need for that to actually read some configuration, I could do that, because on the builder I have the configuration object and I can totally use that. So that's why I prefer, and I say that maybe it's good when it comes to .NET 6 to really have this method take in a web application builder instance. Now, if you are using an ASP.NET Core version prior to this, that would be actually exactly the same. Only that in this case, you would have to provide an iService collection. And if you want or need also the configuration, that configuration should be actually passed as a different parameter to this method. But in the .NET 6 world, that would be enough. And by having this, we can even see another advantage of .NET 6 is that on this web application builder, you have actually everything that you need when it comes to registering services or doing things that needs to be configured before the web application itself is built. So yeah, that's kind of like why this is useful. So that's all for this interface. So it's nothing really complicated. Now let's create two different classes. Let's start with the first one, and I will call this MVC registrar. And in this one, what we'll do is we'll simply actually register all the services here that kind of conceptually belong to this idea of MVC. And let's inherit from not iApplication builder, but iRegistrar. That should be in a separate location. Let's implement the interface. Actually, we are here in the same folder, so there's no problem with that. Now, the only thing that we could do here is very simple. We can go to the program file and actually take from here what actually we need for the MVC configuration. Now, of course, I want to get rid of all these comments. This is not something that we would need, however, so that's okay. Now, these two methods, or these two services registration, they belong to this concept of MVC. So what we'll do here is we simply do that, which is okay. And let's go further and see what else do we have. We have this API versioning and versioned API Explorer. This also kind of like belongs to this one. So let's also take this out and move it in the MVC registrar. Okay, cool. So we have created this register. Now let's add another register here. So add new file, a class, sorry, in this case, and this would be called Swagger register. Okay, but let's go to the previous one, because I see we have some errors, because we have to kind of like of course import all the usings that we need for that. But other than that, there's really nothing. Sorry for that. There's really nothing that we really need to do besides this. Okay, so now we have this one. Let's go back to the Swagger, and I don't recall exactly, have we already copied this? No, I guess not. So these are the things that we actually use for Swagger. And you see that our file already is really more readable than that. So let's go to this Swagger register and simply say that it implements also iRegistrar. Okay, and let's implement the interface. That would do it, and just move the service registrations here, but this is not what I wanted to copy. So let's get back here to our program file. Okay, and these should be the ones that we want. So let's go back to this Swagger register, and right now everything should be okay. Of course, for this one, we would need another using, and right now everything should be okay with that. Let's just clean up further our file so we don't need all these lines here. They are not needed anymore. Now, what we will have instead is we'll need to find actually a way to, or what we want to achieve is actually when the application starts up, I want to have something that kind of like scans my assembly for all registers, and for all registers that it finds, it would then simply call this register services method, which of course will register the services that are needed. So this is, or we can achieve this very, very easily through reflection. And for doing that, we'll actually create here a new folder, because we'll create an extension method. And let's call this extensions. And in these extensions, let's add a new one. And let's name it, we'll add a new class. And I would like, it's true that here we want to create an extension method for the builder, for the web application builder. But when I name my class here, I want to actually make it more specific or more concrete about what type of extension methods this class includes. So I will call this register extensions. That should be okay right now. Cool. So yeah, this class is actually not very, very complicated. We'll just have here a method. Of course, we'll make this class static. And this method will also be static because it will be an extension method. It will return void, and it will be called register services. Now, this will be an extension method as said, and this will be an extension method on the web application builder, because remember, we want to pass the web application builder to the method, to the register services method of each register. So let's give it a name here, which would be the builder. And now comes the fun part. So what we want to achieve through reflection is assembly scanning. So essentially what we want to do is when the application starts up, we want to scan a certain assembly for all the classes that implement this iRegister interface. And when we find those types, we want to create instances of them, and on that instances, then just execute or invoke the register services method. Now, the way that assembly scanning works, and this is actually conceptually the same, for instance, when you add AutoMapper to your ASP.NET Core application, or when you add, for instance, mediator. It's exactly the same. You have to provide a type or an array of types, and in those assemblies will be done the scanning. So we just need an entry type to get the assembly to which that type belongs, and then do the scanning that we want. So let's have here a type, and let's call this scanning type, because we want to use this as a start for our assembly scanning. So this is nothing really, really complicated. And now comes the fun part. We want to get, when the application starts up, an enumerable of all the instances, all the classes that actually implement this iRegister interface. And this is actually very, very easy. So first of all, we have to start from the scanning type, and then get the assembly of this scanning type. And after we get the assembly, we want to get all the types of the assembly. So that's actually the first part that we want to do. Now, when we got all the types that belong to that specific assembly, of course, we can use the power of link or linkU to perform some further filtering, because we just want to pinpoint only the types that actually implement this iRegister interface. So we will have here this where, and we will say that T, we say is assignable to, and we say that it should be assignable to I type of I register. So this is how we define that it should be the type. So the types that we actually find in this list, we want only types that can be assigned to this iRegister interface. And there are some other conditions that are important for us. And those conditions are, and we don't want the type to be an abstract class because we cannot create instances of abstract classes. And here we have T is abstract. And we also don't want to actually take into consideration interfaces because we cannot create an instance of an interface. So we also want only the types that are not interfaces. And that's actually it. Now, the next thing that we have to think about is, okay, we have then filtered only the types that we actually care about. Now, the next step is, of course, we want to create an instance for that. For that, we can simply use the select. And here we can say activator.create instance. The activator is, well, the class that actually allows us to create instances of different types when we are using reflection. Now, the last thing that we actually need to do is to cast this to the interface so that we can be able to execute the method. So in this case, I will have this cast, and as I say that I would cast this to an iRegister. And as far as we did this filtering here, this cast should work because here we will have only types that actually implement this iRegister interface. So that would actually be it for the assembly scanning. It's very, very easy. And the cool thing is that right now, of course, we would need to add this to our builder. But the idea is that when the application starts up, this code will run, it will scan the assembly for all the types that implement the iRegister interface. And then the next thing that we actually need to do is we need a for each. And we say that here for each register in registrars. Okay, so what's the problem here? Maybe I have a typo somewhere. So let's just copy paste this. Cool. Type. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. This should be like that. That was a problem. That's a method, so we have to execute a method, of course. This cast. Okay. So right now we just have to do the following. Register. So on the instance that we are now, just register services, and we just pass in the builder because we have it as this is an extension method. And that's actually it for the scanning part. So right now we can simply go to our program.cs file and we can say here builder. And how did we call that? We did call the register services. Okay, and here we'll have to specify a type of, and we just specify the program class because this is the assembly where we want the scanning to happen. Of course, we just need to add the extension and everything should be fine. But already, as we moved a lot of things, we can just also get rid of a lot of unnecessary usings. So that would actually be it. Now, let's run this application because it should actually work exactly the same. So the functionality has not changed at all. The only thing is that we have created this mechanism where we scan the assembly for a certain type, and then we automatically do the services registration. So let's get Swagger over. We are on version 1 of our API, and we see that we got this product with Visual Studio. So if we switch to version 2 and we try it out, we should get product that would have rider here as the name. So our versioning works, everything is still working, but our file is much more cleaner. Now, we still have some work to do here. Of course, we just can also remove this. But if we go to this other part, for instance, where we see that here for the use Swagger UI, here we have to provide some options that we actually want to use, and in which we essentially specify exactly how Swagger or how the Swagger UI middleware should create the different URLs and how it should implement those endpoints. Now, of course, when it comes to middleware registration, because this is essentially a middleware, what it would happen is, of course, that probably for a lot of cases, we would have kind of like these configuration actions, because if we look into this app use Swagger UI, it actually takes in an action of Swagger UI options. And this is a common pattern in ASP.NET Core, that you just provide the configuration options as an action, as an incoming parameter to your middleware registration. And if we use regular lambdas here, now the problem is that we will have to write some code here. And if for the other one, for instance, we would also need to add some configurations, or for our custom middleware, then we'll have to actually add here plenty of code. The problem here is with this pipeline is that here we cannot simply split this into really separate files, because we have to really take care about the order in which all these elements are registered. This is a very, very important topic when it comes to middleware. And since, well, we could make sure that we can take all, we could take an approach similar to what we had with registers for the services, but then it would be more complicated than that, because we would have to make sure that these actually types are scanned in a specific order, and that the methods are executed in a specific order, so that we can match the order that we have here in the middleware pipeline configuration. So that would be a little bit more complicated, so I would not go that route. However, we can still simply also optimize or keep this file cleaner by just removing all the code that we want to write in these lambda functions. Because essentially what we have here is something for which we could just provide a method that would return a Swagger UI options object. So in this case, we can just extract this into methods in a different class. So I would, for that, like to create here a new folder in our application. And this new folder, I will call, for instance, configuration actions, because here we will just have actions for the configurations that we need, for instance here, but even here. So yeah, the idea is simple. So let's add here a new class. We can even make this static, and we can simply call this middleware configuration actions. Okay. And we can make this even static, because I don't want necessarily to create an instance for that. And here we have this Swagger middleware configuration. So let's create a method here in our, not extensions, but middleware configuration actions. And let's have, it should be public, and it should return a Swagger UI options. There are a lot of typos here, so we just also need a using for that. So it would return that configure Swagger middleware. So that's actually what we provide here. Now, if we take a look here, what we need, we actually need also the application itself, because we need the app to get a required service. So in this case, we can go here to this method and say that we want a web application as an incoming parameter, and that would actually do it. Now, of course, we can go back here in our program and then just simply copy this and move it over to this newly created method. Of course, here we also need the Swagger UI options as an incoming parameter. Swagger UI options, and let's call this options. And after we do our stuff, we just return these options. Okay, we are cool with that. We just need to add here a new using. And theoretically, right now, we should be good to go. Let's take just a look. let's make this also static, of course, because I really don't need an instance for that. And what we can do here is we can simply go back to our program file, and instead of having all these lines of code here, in which we specify how we actually want to configure this Swagger, we can just have here middleware configuration actions, and we should be able to import or to add the using configuration actions. Yeah, this is actually what I want to have here. And on this one, then I have this configure Swagger middleware, and on the configure Swagger middleware, I'd pass in the app and the options themselves. And right now we should be good to go. So we had, I guess, 8 lines of code previously. Right now we have only 1, and we can even remove one other using. So that's pretty cool, I guess. Our file right now is really clean. We have a total of 19 lines of code, including also the usings that we have at the top. So I would say that it is much more readable. And if we go in the registers, we'll see here, okay, this registers MVC services. So it's fairly straightforward. If we go here to the Swagger, we see it's also very straightforward and readable. And it kind of like makes our code better while keeping this startup class. In our case, in .NET 6, this is the program.cs class. But as said, you can use the exact same approach for previous versions of ASP.NET Core. It works exactly the same. So let's run the application before we actually wrap this up and check if everything is still working. And I would expect to not have any type of problems here. So let's bring Swagger basically back. So let's do a try it out on the v1 endpoint, and we see that we have everything correctly. We still have this version 2 endpoint, and if we make a get for that one, we try it out, we get this version 2 with rider, which is correct. So our API is still working exactly the same as it was working before, but we have a very clean and readable program.cs file, which will actually not grow very much further, because when we need to add other services, we just add them to the existing registers, or we create existing registers, and no matter how many new registers we add, our assembly scanning will do the job, will do the magic, and everything will be registered. And of course, if we then add other middleware registrations where we would need configuration options, we would then simply go to our middleware configuration actions and provide the implementations there for everything that we actually need. And this will ensure that our startup class, in our case in .NET 6 is the program.cs class, is really easy to read and understand. And that's a really important setup whenever you start a new ASP.NET Core project. In our case, it's of course an ASP.NET Core Web API. So that would be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you think this content was useful, please don't be shy and share it with your peers. Spread the word. Sharing is caring, and I would highly appreciate that. If you want to also, or if you have questions, just once again, don't be shy and use the comment section below this video, and let's just get a discussion started. I'm really very happy whenever somebody has a question or just wants to add something, and when we create some meaningful discussions out of that. That's really important, because the most important part for this Codechronicles channel is that we actually want to have a very nice and helpful community, that we will be able to discuss different topics as part of the comments on these videos. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.